Why telling your ADHD partner, "You're hurting me," isn't helping. Here's one critical mistake that partners of adults with ADHD often make. Seeking to motivate positive change, they tell their ADHD partner how much their actions or inactions hurt them. It seems logical, right? If someone is hurting you, the solution is to tell them. The assumption is they will take steps to improve those behaviors. If that doesn't work, you might try again, this time perhaps more emphatically, expressing the depths of your hurt. Maybe add crying or screaming. Possibly they didn't hear you the first 20 times. Finally, you might conclude that you need a therapist to mediate, to help your ADHD partner hear you, to have empathy, to hold them accountable. Careful, though. This risks creating more frustration, distrust, and deepened emotional rifts. Why? Because this isn't about your ADHD partner hearing or not hearing you. And it's likely not about your ADHD partner feeling no empathy for you. It's about your ADHD partner being able to act on what they've heard. But yes, sometimes the hearing part is iffy too, if distractibility interferes with focusing on what you're saying. Unfortunately, most couple therapists have no idea how to help you because they don't understand ADHD. With this podcast, I clarify misconceptions and offer a clearer path to clarity and harmony. Key takeaway: all is not as it seems. As a preeminent ADHD expert, Russell Barkley, PhD, says, ADHD isn't about not knowing what to do. It's about doing what you know. How might this play out in ADHD-challenged relationships? For example, the ADHD partner is late to every important event. If you travel together, that makes you late too. So much stress and loss of pleasure simply because your partner, quote, refuses to be on time. We might start softly by suggesting to our ADHD partner, you need to use a calendar and set reminders. They might give it a try, but the effort soon trails off. We get more hurt and angrier. You're hurting me. Why do you refuse to be on time? Why are you so selfish? Day after day, the cycle of frustration and misunderstanding grows more ingrained. What psychologist Arthur L. Robin, PhD, and I call the adult ADHD-focused dysfunctional interaction cycle. It's ridiculously predictable and common, yet it doesn't have to be this way. Chances are the ADHD partner already recognizes the need. Implementing it, though, figuring out a system, that's another thing entirely. This requires learning ADHD-specific strategies, creating external structures and routines, and possibly medication adjustments. Pathological demand avoidance, weaponized incompetence, RSD. If we self-educate mostly online, though, we might latch onto alternate explanations for our ADHD partner's seeming lack of care in not doing the thing we ask of them. Superficially, the explanations we find resonate profoundly. Unfortunately, they don't shed light on why the behavior is happening. Neither do they point to paths for healing. In fact, they risk making things worse. For example, consider these 3 snappy terms promoted online. First, pathological demand avoidance, PDA. This is a very controversial and only proposed subtype of autism spectrum disorder, defined by characteristics such as a demand avoidance, defined as a greater than typical refusal to comply with requests or expectations. 2. Weaponized incompetence. Another term that websites use to boost traffic, especially on TikTok. It's generally defined as a passive-aggressive behavior where someone intentionally or unintentionally pretends to be unable to complete a task, forcing others to take over. It used to be called playing dumb. For example, a partner might claim they are a bad cook in order to avoid making dinner. They might also forget half the items on a grocery list or put groceries away randomly with hopes they'll never again be asked to repeat the task. While this surely can happen, ADHD or not, weaponized incompetence is typically not the correct label for what we see with ADHD. Third, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD. RSD is described as a condition that causes people to experience extreme emotional pain in response to rejection, criticism, or failure, even to simple questions such as, "Did you bring in the mail?" We see this complaint or similar is repeated on the internet ad nauseum. And then his RSD kicks in, and I can't say anything else. When the partners of adults with ADHD wrongly perceive alleged RSD as causing the meltdown reaction, they typically start walking on eggshells. That helps no one, and it can cause enormous harm. Again, these terms can strongly resonate with people who are desperate for answers. Moreover, the marketing forces pushing these terms are great at manipulating Google rankings. But that doesn't mean these terms accurately explain what is happening. Instead, think of them as fast food that reduces overwhelming complexity to simple understanding. Trouble is that understanding is often wrong. What works better than saying, "You hurt me"? Right now, let's take a closer look at why telling your ADHD partner they've hurt you, especially in certain ways, at certain times, and using the hot terms listed previously isn't helping. More importantly, let's explore what might actually work instead. Please know, one podcast cannot tell you all you need to know about adult ADHD relationship strategies. If it could, I wouldn't have toiled for years writing 2 comprehensive books and hundreds of blog posts. Here, I hope only to spark new thought and optimism and question assumptions. You'll find comprehensive resources at the original blog post on which this podcast is based. Start viewing challenges through the ADHD lens. ADHD often comes with an entirely different way of processing emotions and managing behaviors. It's not a matter of simply deciding to change once hurt is understood. It's about overcoming significant neurological and logistical hurdles. Think about it. Adults with ADHD commonly struggle with impulse control, memory, time management, motivation, initiation, and emotional regulation. Even with the best intentions and plenty of empathy, creating behavior change and new habits often requires ADHD-savvy strategies. Insisting that if you loved me, you would not do X, or but we talked about this, typically only makes things worse. Complaining that you have no empathy is more likely to create divides, not build bridges. So often, the partners of adults with ADHD simply don't know what they are up against, and neither do their ADHD partners. Example: I'm supposed to forget about my feelings. A woman writes in an online forum, "How do your ADHD partners react when you tell them they've hurt your feelings? My husband can't seem to grasp that I'm allowed to be upset. He immediately shifts the focus to his own feelings, saying, I don't understand him, or he spirals into, I'm a piece of shit. Everything I do is wrong. It makes me feel worse when he pulls this emotional manipulation, as though I'm supposed to forget about my feelings and make everything okay for him. This usually happens at night when his meds have worn off. I try to be understanding, reminding myself it's just the ADHD, not him. But lately, I feel like I'm not allowed to have emotions anymore." Is it emotional manipulation or defensive overwhelm? This situation might feel like emotional manipulation. It might look like emotional manipulation to outside observers. You might feel entirely justified in wondering if your partner is intentionally trying to make you feel guilty for having emotions. Before latching on to that conclusion, you might want to consider ADHD-specific explanations for this behavior. This pattern of defensiveness is not uncommon in ADHD-affected relationships. We might even summarize it as deny, deflect, minimize. Sure, it's dysfunctional, but is it emotional manipulation? Is her ADHD partner intentionally, truly making her feel guilty for having feelings? Let's dig a little deeper to ponder the possibilities. Distorted interpretations. Fuel negative emotions. Remember, what we tell ourselves about an event determines our emotional reactions. This is cognitive behavioral therapy 101. Misinterpret the event and we can put our emotions through the ringer. This applies to individuals with ADHD, but also both partners in an ADHD-challenged couple. Sure, emotional manipulation is always a possibility, ADHD or not, so is gaslighting. On some level, her ADHD partner might have subconsciously learned a long time ago to avoid uncomfortable conversations by turning the tables. You do that too. I explained this common enough ADHD relationship phenomenon in Is It You, Me, or Adult ADHD? More often, though, this reaction stems from feeling overwhelmed, misunderstood, or incapable of fixing the situation. To make matters worse, these conversations often happen when your ADHD partner's brain is already fried from a frustrating day. You are exhausted and resentful from continuing to carry an unequal burden of responsibilities. Look beyond symptoms for poor coping responses. To start getting clarity, we self-educate on ADHD symptoms, as well as the poor coping responses common to late diagnosis. They're called poor coping responses, but sometimes they've served as strong survival instincts. These reflexive habits have gotten them this far through a confusing world, sometimes for many decades. But then comes a time with diagnosis to revise those old habitual responses into healthier ones. This takes effort and expert guidance. Timing matters. Minding your partner's medication schedule. First and foremost, it's essential to recognize the timing of these conversations. As the person noted above, this usually happens at night when his meds have worn off. Remember, ADHD medication helps with more than just focusing. It plays a crucial role in regulating emotions, managing impulse control, and building emotional resilience. When that medication wears off, particularly in the evening, your partner may struggle more with defensiveness, emotional outbursts, or even withdrawal, especially in the early months of treatment. This doesn't mean they don't care about your feelings, but that their brain is simply running on empty. If you aren't aware of your partner's medication schedule, you might find yourself navigating a dangerous guessing game. There is never a good time. What's that? I think I hear you saying, well, when is a good time, Gina? Because my ADHD partner seems to think a good time is never. Trust me, I get it. Been there, did that, wrote the books. But here's the good news. This avoidance strategy is common. It's not unique to your partner's personality. It is a predictable phenomenon with predictable solutions. What you hear is not always the quote truth. Without being solidly educated in ADHD, it's easy to think that your partner's reaction is a form of emotional manipulation or, at best, indifference. A lack of empathy? a refusal to cooperate. Maybe it's been suggested that your ADHD partner is a narcissist or oppositional. For instance, when you plead for more help around the house or more affection, maybe your ADHD partner rolls their eyes or withdraws. You might interpret this as them not caring, even if callously mocking you. And sure, in some cases that might be true, but consider this potential explanation. These behaviors might spring from feeling cornered and or uncertain how to respond, of feeling like they screwed up again, and there is nothing to be done about it. If you believe that the solution is confronting this behavior or holding your ADHD partner accountable, you can always try that. But it's not generally recommended, not by anyone who has serious expertise. What's more likely to work? Addressing the issues that fuel that behavior, to see those behaviors as symptom more than cause. Example, my ADHD partner doesn't care about my feelings. One man writes, no matter how I bring it up, any feeling I express turns into a fight. She doesn't care about my feelings. Instead, she gets passive-aggressive, mocks me, and calls me names. Somehow, my expressing a need always shifts to how I hurt her, how I never stop criticizing her. Then I'm ignored for days. Nothing ever gets resolved, and once she decides it's over, she acts like nothing happened. It's exhausting, frustrating, and incredibly lonely. Let's step back a second. Again, what if the perceived problem here isn't his partner's lack of love for him or emotional manipulation? What if it has more to do with ADHD symptoms plus survival mechanisms developed over years of living with poorly managed, unrecognized ADHD? 3 common ones are why try? It doesn't matter how good my intentions, I always screw it up. Avoidance. If I don't even try, I don't screw up again. All or nothing. All my partner does is criticize me. I never do anything right in his eyes. To learn how this might feel to the person with long unrecognized ADHD, check out my post at ADHD Roller Coaster blog. When ADHD feels like not being good enough. Break the dysfunctional cycle. Problem solve together. So, what's the alternative? If telling your ADHD partner how much they hurt you isn't working, what might work better? One of the key strategies is shifting the focus from emotional hurt to pragmatic problem solving. Adults with ADHD often struggle with recognizing how their behaviors affect others. It's often not because they don't care, though the defensive act can look that way. Rather, it's because they're caught up in the whirlwind of their own challenges. When conversations focus solely on emotional hurt, it can feel like a vast, unsolvable puzzle. Panic sets in. The reaction is shut down, or worse. Instead of dropping the problem in our ADHD partner's lap and expecting them to fix it, we can try approaching the issue with the non-critical goal of plain old problem solving. Sit down together for 5 minutes and, on paper, note the challenge and brainstorm solutions. Pick one, draw up a plan, and implement it. If you didn't experience success, examine where the plan went wrong, neutrally and factually. Troubleshoot. Were no reminder systems in place or were they ignored? How can that change? What if it still doesn't work? Go to the next idea on the list and try again. The idea is not to simply give up when the first idea didn't work. If you feel you can't even get to the point of sitting down for 5 minutes, then back up all the way to ADHD foundational lessons. One strategy cannot possibly address all the complexity. Instead, we go step by step, starting with the most basic and building to the complexity. For many adults with ADHD, it will be best to optimize medication and sleep strategies before attempting to boost cooperation. Reality check your beliefs and gather facts. It's hard to overstate this. Partners of adults with ADHD often fall into the trap of believing that if they just express their pain clearly enough, their partner will change. If only it were that simple. We are talking about a complex condition. It involves neurobiologically driven behaviors. But again, in the case of late diagnosis ADHD, it also involves dysfunctional coping responses that have become deeply ingrained over a lifetime. Neither symptoms nor coping responses can change in a positive way without consistent, informed strategies. Not general therapy, awkwardly shoehorned into what you are experiencing. Not even legitimate ADHD therapy when it does not equitably include the partner. For example, not coming to bed when promised. Instead of saying, "You hurt me," when you stay up all night instead of coming to bed when you promised, try framing it as, "I'd love for us to find a way to wind down and go to bed together at the same time. Can we brainstorm some ideas?" This takes the pressure off your ADHD partners to fix a problem they might not even fully understand and shifts the focus to solving a puzzle. For some adults with ADHD, the solution might be a matter of better organization in the evenings around bedtime routines. Once their head hits the pillow, they go right to sleep. Others, though, might be grappling with an ADHD-related sleep disorder called delayed sleep phase. It's basically an out-of-sync circadian rhythm. They don't feel sleepy and can't go to sleep, perhaps not for hours. They subconsciously cope with this by streaming videos or distracting themselves in other ways. Electronic. Get educated now on what is actually happening. We typically don't address this by extracting agreements to be in bed by a certain time. That is a setup for horn locking and failure. We also don't assume that we know why the sleep-related behavior is happening. Unless we are very well versed on this topic, we could be absolutely wrong. For example, we blame night owl habits or screen addiction. Sure, that can be part of it, but it's often putting the cart before the horse. That is, ADHD symptoms can fuel a tendency to gravitate to an electronic screen for passive stimulation. We address this by learning about what's happening and taking informed steps to address it. To help you start wrapping your head around these concepts, check out the link in this podcast description to a free video from Solving Your Adult ADHD Puzzle, Physical Strategies. It explains how ADHD-related sleep issues become ADHD couple issues when we're operating from ignorance. Understanding paves the way to creating positive change. Let me be absolutely clear. Understanding your ADHD partner's challenges, that does not mean tolerating dysfunction. Yes, it's important to view their behavior in the context of ADHD, but that doesn't mean your needs should be overlooked. To create a happier, healthier life together, it's absolutely necessary to navigate gray area. Building a healthy relationship requires both partners to 1. Work together. 2. Troubleshoot challenges. 3. Create workable solutions. It's a journey, but it's one that can ultimately lead to a stronger, more connected relationship. By shifting from emotional appeals to ADHD-informed, practical problem solving, both partners can work toward creating a more supportive and less frustrating dynamic. Some couples can begin this right away. Some will need a stronger foundation. Nothing is cookie cutter or universal about adult ADHD. It can all feel overwhelming unless you take it step by step. In other words, Setting up a shared online calendar and expecting your ADHD partner to use it without fail or at all. Well, it might work for some folks. For others, it points to denial of how entrenched ADHD-related issues with time blindness truly can be. Trying a shared calendar without building a solid foundation for supporting executive functions is like trying to put curtains on the 9th floor of a building when the foundation hasn't even been laid. I explain this in depth in Solving Your Adult ADHD Puzzle: Practical Supports. More resources to support you. It's more true than I can express. Understanding how ADHD potentially affects relationships or life in general takes more than a podcast, a blog post, or a video. You're just not going to get what you need on TikTok, and you might pick up many things you definitely do not need. There are many layers, variables, and strategies that require deeper exploration. What sets my work apart is a sophisticated but clear focus on understanding ADHD at its core, how it affects behavior, communication, emotional regulation, even sleep and health, and then applying evidence-based strategies that work with those unique challenges, step by step. Relying on traditional relationship advice risks intensifying ADHD-challenged couple troubles. This is hard for some to accept, that they cannot wholly trust the mental health profession to guide them. Even those claiming specialty in ADHD. I've been in the trenches with you for 25 years. Your problems and suffering are front of mind. That's why I know the importance of offering you guidance-based, solid research, clinical evidence, and personal experience with thousands of people over the years. Please check out my other podcasts along with blog posts, videos, comprehensive online training, and Zoom discussion groups.